Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 379 through 381, which will cover manga chapters 487 through 490. I guess a little bit of 490, just the first few pages. But yes, we bring in the close to the Thriller Bark arc, as well as finally getting to welcome a new crew member to the Straw Hat Pirates. So, synopsis. We get the final chapter of Brook's tragic backstory and the inherited will of his fallen crew that he now carries with him as he joins his new crew, the Straw Hats. With everything resolved, they say their goodbyes and set sail towards their next island, Fishman Island. Again, with these episodes, like the last several ones, we don't really have too many differences. The only one I could really find was there's an additional portion of the conversation that Brook and Yorkie have with Laboon trying to convince him to stay at the Twin Capes. Everything prior to him talking about them being back in 2 to 3 years if they keep heading forward is sort of added in the anime. But that's about it. But the general gist is still the same though, so I don't even know if I could really consider this a difference. It's just a little bit more extension. But anyways, with that out of the way, let's get into the episodes themselves. So, as we start in on Brook's backstory flashback in his bio card, it's revealed that Brook was 38 at the time of the flashback, which takes place 50 years ago, making him 88 in the present, making him the oldest crew member of the Straw Hats, and if that wasn't obvious already, considering, it's been 50 years. Although this would make the third Straw Hat in a row getting progressively older with the members as they go. The original 5 all being around 19 to 21 years old, and then Chopper was 15 when he joined. Then we have Robin at 28, Frankie at 34, and now Brook at 88 years old. So they've gotten progressively older, starting with Robin. That doesn't really mean anything, it's just something I wanted to point out. One other thing I wanted to also point out is with Brook's human form, if you look at his forehead, he has a scar in the same shape as the crack he has on his forehead when he's in his bone form. So this would mean that at some point, Brook sustained an injury where his skull was cracked open about a third of the way into his head, and he's just fine. Because he will later go on to open his skull all the way along that same crack where he stores the tone dial. So at some point, this crack either went all the way through his skull and he was still fine, or it was exacerbated when he died at some point throughout all of his sort of fights with Yuma. But the initial scar, though, goes in pretty deep, and the crack on his skull also basically matches up with that as well. So when he was alive still in his human form, he did sustain some sort of an injury that basically made his skull crack to the point where something actually got pretty close to his actual brain. Which may also explain why he's so weird. We get to finally see Brook's old pirate crew, the Rumbar Pirates, and their day-to-day routine as a musically themed pirate crew. And we also get to see how they meet an insanely cute young Laboon, as well as all the adventures they go on where Laboon and the Rumbar Pirates help each other out, as Laboon can save them if they ever fall overboard, while the crew can help Laboon when he's attacked by larger creatures that can't defend themselves because he's lost his pod. And it's a really sweet montage of seeing Brook and Laboon grow particularly fond of each other compared to the rest of the crew. Eventually, they get to the part where we've all heard from Crocus, where they have to separate from Laboon as they feel they can't protect him in the Grand Line. And it's so heartbreaking seeing Laboon not wanting to be left behind and sad. It really puts his pain that he experiences back on the Twin Capes into perspective even more so. This is again another great example of Oda adding to his story and retroactively making past events even better than they already were, so that it has this really great experience upon rewatch. And so it is pretty rewarding rewatching One Piece despite how long it is. But he really does add a lot to past events because he keeps adding things to it. They eventually do make it up the reverse mountain, and we get to see a young Crocus as he welcomes the Rumbar Pirates, and then casually inquires if the whale is their pet, and to their shock, Laboon followed them to the Grand Line up the reverse mountain, while sustaining some mild scrapes, obviously foreshadowing his massive scars he'd get ramming the Red Line later on. After spending a few days repairing their ship, they finally convinced Laboon to wait for them there, and they set off on their Grand Line adventure. Of course, we all know this is the last time they will see each other, and it's a really bittersweet moment. It then skips forward in time 3 years to see the Rumbar Pirates ship dilapidated with Brook alone in his skeleton form in the Florian Triangle, making you still wonder what in the world happened to cause this. And I know this is an animated series meant for young kids, but Brook's whole ordeal is so dark when you think about it. When you really take a step back and think about what Brooks had to endure, then when each new piece of Brook's backstory gets revealed, it's even grimmer than we think, as we see Brooks sorting through the remains of his long-dead crew and having to lay them to rest one by one by himself in a dark and lonely ocean with no hope of rescue. And I know I've mentioned this in the past, but this is really dark and sad. Like, if I were in that situation, I honestly do not know if I could handle it. We then go back in time again to see a bit more happy times with the Rumbar Pirates, but at some point, Captain Yorkie and a handful of other men contract some unknown mystery illness that has no cure at the time. At first, I thought this may have been the same 5-day disease Nami contracted on Little Garden, but I think upon my scrutiny, I don't think this is the case, as this disease seems to be transmissible through some means of either proximity or touch or whatever, while Nami's was from a bite from some sort of an animal called a kestia. And even though the entire crew was around Nami, they never once got sick. Although Luffy and Sanji and Usopp kind of talk about the fact that they never get sick, and clearly they are all some sort of a superhuman, except for maybe Usopp. In order to save the rest of the crew, though, they decide to leave Captain Yorkie and the others infected on an island to seek treatment, and to also try and eventually navigate through the calm belt to return to their home in West Blue. Then we get a really heartbreaking moment as Brook says goodbye to his captain, promising to carry on for him, and that one day they will all reunite with Laboon. It's kind of assumed that Yorkie never made it, but I think the fact that Oda threw this line in there kind of hints that Captain Yorkie could possibly still be alive in the present day as an old man, and may also get to reunite with Laboon and Brook at some point. Just the fact that Oda threw in that line where he's going to try and make it out of the Grand Line through the Calm Belt, which we all know is possible if you have the resources to do so, but we don't quite get any confirmation. And to this day, I still don't know what the fate of Yorkie is, and we may never know until possibly towards the end of the series. One thing I also want to point out is while Brook is rather eccentric in his first life, he's not quite the manic and crazy self that he is now, which adds to the idea that yes, being isolated for so long is really kind of what drove Brook to be a bit off. And that makes perfect sense given what he's had to go through and learning how to cope with all of that. You begin to see some of that as he starts to do weird stuff on the boat, and he starts to hallucinate that his crew was still alive, only to realize that this grim reality is his new reality. But back sort of in the flashback, Brook, now a captain of the Rumbar Pirates, starts to build his own name, gaining a bounty of his own and a wanted poster for himself. But back in the present, Brook pulls out a tone dial, surprisingly out of his skull, and proceeds to explain to everyone that there's a recording on that dial that he wants to share with Laboon. And then we get to see perhaps one of the most saddest and depressing moments in One Piece, as it's revealed what's actually recorded on that tone dial. I know I keep saying that about many moments, but this one always hits pretty hard. I mean, there are definitely a lot of depressing and sad moments in One Piece that really hit you, but this is a little different. I feel like all the other ones are like intense emotion, but this one's just really sad and depressing and grim. We learned that after a particular battle, the entire crew have been mortally wounded with some sort of poison with the weapons that the rival pirates actually used on them, and they're all near death. So Brook suggests at least they go out with a bit of fun by playing themselves out while recording it for Laboon, just in case his Yomi Yomi fruit actually works, And if it does, he promises to use his second life to deliver his last performance back to Brook, or back to Laboon. And I'm already starting to get a little teary-eyed because this is such a sad moment. They begin to sing Bink Sake one last time together. And the great thing about the way this moment is presented is that it cuts between the different eras and moments in time, not just from the present to the past, but the different moments in the past as well, really showing that this particular song has the ability to bridge time and space and connect people from all over. It also continues to feed into the ever important theme in One Piece of inherited will, that Brook and the Straw Hats have inherited the Rumbar Pirates' dream of sailing the Grand Line and returning to Laboon, all doing it while singing merrily to Bink Sake, which is a really beautiful sentiment. But as beautiful as this moment is, it's just so freaking sad. As the Rumbar members begin to succumb to the poison one by one, leaving only 4 as Brook mentions that now it's a quartet. Then, as the last 3 fall one by one, it goes from quartet to trio, then duet, and finally with Brook, the only one left, he painfully says solo. This moment is just insanely heartbreaking, listening to Brook play, and then finally passing away as well due to the poison. But there's finally hope in Brook's life. All his hopes and dreams that were once lost have now been brought back to life, as his Yomi Yomi fruit once did for his life. With the help of the Straw Hats and Luffy, in one of the most powerful moments for me personally in this series, because it and Brook as a character is a constant reminder for me that yes, life can suck. And while I've had the immensely good fortune of not having to endure anything even close to a truly harsh tragedy or hardship, life can still feel like a very difficult and lonely existence at times. That seems dark and hopeless, but as long as you keep fighting and do your best to stay positive, good things will eventually come. This is of course a theme that's present in almost every one of the Straw Hats' journeys, like Nami, Sanji, Robin, and Chopper particularly, but none more so than Brook. He, to me personally, embodies that theme to the most degree, even though he doesn't have a body per se, because he's a skeleton. Yo ho ho ho. This is represented best in Brook's reaction to being invited into the Straw Hats when he screams in pure joy and relief while he shakes with tears streaming down his face, "I'm so glad to be alive," or "Ikitete yokatta." Like, it's all because this day has arrived. And Cho's performance here is so amazing. You can really hear the enormous amount of weight that has been lifted off of Brook and the sheer happiness and joy he's experiencing with the resurrection of his dream and a new crew/family that he's grown to really care for and cares for him. I just love this moment, and it's definitely one of those moments that always sticks with me even long after reading or watching this. I often think about this moment at random points, just randomly. Like, I'm not even thinking about One Piece, but it's just sometimes I think about this moment a lot and how Brook just screams out, "Ikitete yokatta," like, I'm so glad to be alive. It's just something that's always stuck with me. I also love how this immense display of emotions, he just casually slips in, "Oh, can I join you?" And of course, Luffy's response is, "Oh, sure," or "Iyo." Because at this point, it's all a formality. Brook has been one of them for a little while now, I feel like, and there's no way Luffy nor the crew was going to contest it. Even though they freak out initially, a new crew member joining is always a special moment in One Piece, and this is really no different. As Brook is internally thinking about returning to Laboon, we get to see Laboon reacting as if he knows that Brook has been saved and is on his way, as he's wailing and smiling, with Crocus noting that he's in a particularly good mood today, and it's a really sweet moment that definitely brought a tear to my eye, for sure. Brook then formally introduces himself to everyone as the former leader of a certain kingdom's assault convoy, as well as the former acting captain of the Rumbar Pirates with a $33 million bounty, or 33 million berry bounty, and with that he pledges himself to his new captain, Luffy. A couple things I want to mention about this moment. Oda never throws in tidbits randomly, and I always wondered if Brook's time as this assault convoy leader in an unnamed kingdom will come back and be fleshed out. I personally hope it does someday, But as of now, we have not yet seen it up to the point where I'm at in the manga, which is chapter 1080. The other thing I want to mention is how Luffy is able to sort of gather people that will follow him, especially people with big personalities like Zoro and Sanji, but also people who are leaders in their own right, as Frankie has been the boss of the Frankie family and now Brook a former captain of his own pirate crew. Yet we see that none of these people seem to have any issues relinquishing their position as a leader and continue to follow someone now. We've seen in the pirate world that being a ship captain is something that is very prideful for many, and not many would willingly give that up in terms of status. But those that eventually get to know Luffy do so happily, which is obviously reflective of Luffy's likability, but also goes back to how the power structure and chain of command is very different for the Straw Hat Pirates, unlike many other crews. There's this almost lateral hierarchy, and whoever has the skills that is needed takes the reins. We've seen it time and time again with Nami, Zoro, Sanji, and Chopper all taking control of a situation, leading based on what's needed. And Luffy has created sort of an environment where his crew can do this, and he never needs to feel threatened or undermined because he leads through respect, not fear or power. And we've even seen situations where Luffy hands off some command to, say, Vivi when she was with the crew for a time. And it's really cool how that seems to be sort of the structure. Of course, when things, get to a point, Luffy is the last line. The buck stops with him, but he knows when to relinquish that and let his crew do their thing. It's awesome to see that great character work that Oda displays here with Brook, as we really do get a sense of what kind of guy Brook is in the way he presents himself. Despite being an all-around silly guy with some crazy tendencies and a couple marbles loose, he is still very much a gentleman and does things in a very proper way with how he addresses everyone with the san suffix, and he bows and formally submits himself to Luffy and the crew. It's a very cool and almost like knightly, very, knight as in like a knight in shining armor type of knight, as he bows and presents himself to like a king, which, Luffy is going to be the future pirate king. So I think it's a very appropriate response. After the party, we get a really awesome gesture from Usopp, Frankie, and Chopper as they help put together a proper grave for the Rumbar Pirates. And we get our classic Chopper bashfulness insulting as Brook thanks them all. I also love the joke where Brook calls the Sunny Lion-chan, and Frankie is annoyed and tells him to call it the Thousand Sunny from now on. I don't know, that joke always kind of is funny because he is a lion. We also learn that Brook is from the West Blue. Not that is anything important as of yet, but still an interesting tidbit to always know that where each of the members come from, because sometimes it is important. Brook stays behind to play for his fallen nakama until suddenly Zoro appears next to him, all awake again, and sticks Yubashiri into the ground, explaining to Brook that he's here to give Yubashiri a proper burial as well, which I always thought was really cool considering the swords in One Piece. At least the Meitos, or the named swords, seem to have a spirit or a will of their own, and he's honoring this fallen sword, sending it off with a little ceremony. It makes you wonder if he did something similar for his original two unnamed black swords when they were broken in the Mihawk fight. But although now that I think about it, maybe they just fell into the sea, because now that I think about and recall it, I don't think those were ever recovered. Only the Wado Ichimonji was actually recovered when Zoro fell into the water. Brook then stares at Zoro, and it's revealed that Brook is also aware of what Zoro did for his captain and nakama. It's never explicitly mentioned what Brook is actually thinking here, but my interpretation of this moment has always been one of awe, but also curiosity of wanting to find out more about this moment from Zoro. But he refrains from mentioning it, as like Sanji, he understands that he should respect Zoro's choice not to reveal what happened, instead choosing to let him know that he's joined the crew. And in a very sweet moment, we get a true smile from Zoro in a long time, which I thought was really great, that even Zoro is happy to see Brook joining the crew. Now that things are wrapping on Thriller Bark, they get ready to sail off to the next island, Fishman Island. And so we get a whole bunch of exposition and teases here, The first thing to note is the tease of the pirate empress Hancock, who will go on to play an important role in the series coming up here real soon. I won't get into too much other specifics around this character because it's pretty heavy spoilers. Also, I have to note how when Sanji and Brook get worked up over mermaids not wearing panties, they both suffer from nosebleeds when Brook has no organs or blood in his body, which makes no sense other than for a comedic joke. And this is something I was always a little worried about, though, when Brook was joining. This idea of having two pervy characters when I already don't like Sanji being as pervy as he is, especially after this arc. Luckily, I can say this doesn't go on to be too big of an issue, as Brook's perviness is very minimal in terms of how it's used. We learn that the Rolling Pirates are very knowledgeable about Fishman Island, and that is because they've been there. But not only that they've been there, they were actually born in the New World, and that her mother was an amazing pirate in the New World. Now, at the time, there were a lot of theories about who her mother could be because of how important this pirate is. And looking back, it was pretty obvious. And most people guessed it right. This was something that never even occurred to me at the time. So I'm going to leave that, even the theory, out of this conversation for now. So that if you're like me and you have no idea, don't even bother. And so, yeah, I'm not going to try and spoil it for you either. I will talk about this in the spoiler section, though. Then we get to learn about one of the most important items in the One Piece world. Now, this isn't a new item to us, but we finally get to learn what it actually is and how it works. And that is the Vivera cards. The Vivera is French for to live. So essentially these are life cards, which is very appropriate as they're tied to the life force of the person that the paper was made for. And even later, we'll eventually go on to learn that the other name for it is Inochi no Kami, or Paper of Life in Japanese. We first saw this way back at the beginning of Arabasta. This is the piece of paper that Ace gave Luffy, where he is told as long as he has that, they can find their way back to each other. And thanks to Lola, we now know what Ace meant by this. This paper is made with supernatural properties where a person's nail clippings, of all things, are infused into the paper, allowing the paper to be tied to the person. And when ripped into pieces, those individual pieces will always seek each other out. Nami and Luffy eventually go on to realize that this is in fact what Ace gave them, but when Luffy pulls Ace's Vivera card out, it's a little scorched, which according to Lola is a signal that Ace's life force is dwindling, no doubt from the injuries sustained versus Blackbeard and being imprisoned and impaled down. Nami is concerned about Ace, but when she presses Luffy if it's really okay, even when the rest of the crew says they're more than willing to take a detour to help him out, but Luffy says it's okay, mentioning how Ace wouldn't want Luffy coming to his rescue every time he's in trouble, and then Ace is more than capable of taking care of himself. Now, this is mostly just my own speculation, but I think Luffy here is showing a bit of just how much he looks up to and idolizes Ace, almost to a superheroic level. Ace is trapped in the place that he was so desperate to prevent Robin and Frankie from being taken to, yet he knows Ace is there now, and still he has all the confidence that Ace will be fine. I think it shows a bit of denial that his invincible big brother is actually in trouble, but also Luffy's unending optimism also I think is getting in the way. Regardless, this has now set in motion a huge story arc for the next part of One Piece. But for now that Zoro is awake, they get to do their traditional welcome cheers for a new crew member, and Luffy finally has his musician that he so badly wanted since the start of the series as they set sail for their next adventure. Now, before we end this, one last mystery that Oda presents us with is the fact that the Florian Triangle had been a place where ships went missing long before Moria had ever showed up, and we'd see what had actually been causing those disappearances. And in the distance, through the clouds, we can see these massive beings. And when I say massive, I mean massive, like sentient mountains with glowing red eyes shaped in the cross, just ominously watching. And they remind me a lot of what they originally witnessed with the Shandian shadows during the Skypiea and Jaya arc, being shined down from the sky into those huge projections. But this time, it appears these beings are actually there as they have actual eyes. And the sheer size of this thing is what gets me every time, as they're probably the biggest thing in the world to date. And whatever these things are, we still don't even know currently all the way up in the chapter 1080 where I am right now. There's been a lot of speculation as to what these things are from a One Piece version of the paranormal Japanese folklore of the Umibozu, or the Sea Priest, which is an entity that is depicted similarly that attacks ships, and unless you give it a bottomless barrel or bucket as a distraction, it will come for you and drown all the sailors. For a time, many people thought these could potentially be the ancient weapons, but we have since learned that this is not the case. But yeah, this is probably one of the creepiest unsolved mysteries in One Piece, and it's even a mystery as to why Oda included them. Aside from maybe explaining away why the Florian Triangle was considered such a dangerous and mysterious place, despite Moria only reigning over it for a very short 10 or so years. So yeah, I think it's just mostly he just threw that in there to explain away the reputation of the Florian Triangle, despite Moria's short reign over it. But anyways, this brings to a close the Thriller Bark arc, and yeah, sure, it had some bumps along the way, but like I've been saying this whole time, I really enjoy Thriller Bark despite its flaws. And in the next podcast, we'll be getting into my overall review of the arc, so stay tuned for that. But if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece. Please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast for updates of when I post new episodes. And also, I've recently started streaming via Twitch every so often. Not as much as I'd like, but yeah, if you wanted to come chat or check it out, you can catch me at twitch.tv/sunny__go. As always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. There will be a decent spoiler section for this because these episodes do set up quite a bit. And so, yeah, we'll get into a bit of spoilers for that. But if you're not interested in any of those, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. Alrighty, so spoiler section. Obviously, like before, these are mostly unscripted, so it's mostly just me rambling. But I think the first thing I wanted to mention, and I'll start small, is the foreshadowing of Sanji's nosebleeds at the subject of mermaids. So here we get our first sort of situation where somebody mentions a mermaid, Sanji imagines one, and then has this massive nosebleed. Now, obviously, this will go on to be a huge plot point and issue for Sanji when he reaches Fishman Island in the New World, which is probably my least favorite part about that whole arc. In fact, probably one of my least favorite things about Sanji in general is the whole subplot with Sanji's incessant nose bleeding. And yeah, we see kind of that being foreshadowed here long before it ever became an issue. And I have to imagine that either Oda picked up on this moment and ran with it, or he was already thinking about that long before Fishman Island even became a thing. Because Fishman Island does not happen for like another, I'd say 3 years from this point. Maybe even more. I haven't really looked at the dates and I don't remember offhand, but yeah. So it's interesting to see that again. I completely forgot about this moment too until I rewatched this on this rewatch. Another thing is the big thing is obviously Lola and her mama, which is later on revealed to be Big Mom. And as I said in the main non-spoiler section of this episode, a lot of people already figured that out, to be honest. And I don't know why it never occurred to me. Especially when she says, when she repeatedly calls her mama, and the fact that the Risky brothers kept mentioning how her mom is a great, amazing pirate in the New World, and a very powerful one at that. It's like, yeah, really the only thing you could think about is the fact that, yeah, it is probably Big Mom. And even Lola kind of looks like a very big and hefty woman herself. And you see from the silhouette that Garp showed in his first mention of the Yonko, it is a very hefty woman. being portrayed as Big Mom. Now, obviously, Big Mom would end up looking very different from that sort of silhouette, but sort of the general idea is still there. And so, yeah, I can see how many people came up with a theory that, yeah, Lola's mom would in fact be Big Mom. And that turns out to be the case when we get to Whole Cake Island way, way down in the rest of the story. And I thought that was a very interesting thing. The other thing that really is interesting too is that, and this kind of gets addressed later on in Whole Cake Island, but the fact that Lola seems to feel like she's on good terms with her mom, and even gives obviously Nami the Vibra card, which does go on to play a huge factor in Whole Cake Island, as it allows Nami to get out of pretty tough situations because she owns that Vibra card. And it is interesting though that when we do find out how Big Mom actually feels about Lola, she is in fact very, very angry with Lola for running away. And it's kind of sad to see that. And we do get to see that with Chiffon and her sister, and it's interesting how they sort of bring that back. And obviously, the same voice actress it plays both Lola and Chiffon, and so that was a really cool detail. But it's interesting how, yeah, Lola seemed to feel like she was on good terms with Big Mom when Big Mom obviously resents her daughter to the point where, yeah, she almost kind of disowns her. And then the other thing we get a tease towards is the first mention of Boa Hancock. Now, we don't get to hear her first name, Boa, nor do we get any mention of the fact that she is one of the Shichibukai. And yeah, we'll get to see that Boa is the final Shichibukai that gets revealed in the series, as we get to see some of the other ones first. We do get to meet Jinbei in Impel Down, and then, yeah, Boa Hancock is the final Shichibukai to get revealed, and we get a mention of her here as the most beautiful person in the world that can rival the beauty of the mermaids. And true to their words, Boa Hancock is definitely one of the most beautiful characters in all of One Piece, and Oda does not hold any punches back on that one. And it's kind of crazy to think how big of a role Boa ends up becoming, almost to the point where she just starts simping on on Luffy for the rest of the time. And I really, it is interesting to see. And I completely forgot too that Boa is actually mentioned here. So yeah, this ending portion really does set up a lot of things to come in the next several arcs with, with Amazon or Sabodi, Amazon Lily, Impel Down, Marineford, and Fishman Island. It all starts to lay the groundwork for and teasing a lot of things to come in the next 3 to 4 arcs. And then finally, the last thing I wanted to mention were those huge mystery beings that attack things in the Florian Triangle. It's still a mystery, but after seeing, like, I wonder if it has anything to do with Zunisha. Like, I know it's not Zunisha, because Zunisha is stuck in the New World and roaming the seas. But I wonder if it's some sort of other animal similar to Zunisha that's kind of stuck in the Florian Triangle. And maybe not quite an elephant, because these things look like tall and skinny things. I really have no idea what these things could possibly be. But after seeing Zunisha, it kind of does remind me of this may be the only thing that could even potentially rival the size of those things. Because Zunisha himself is very tall and massive when standing upright. So I could easily see another similar being to Zunisha also roaming the Grand Line. But in this case, there's 3 of them, it seems like. Or maybe it's just one giant thing with like 3 pointy peaks. I don't know. But yeah, those are just kind of the things I wanted to mention in the spoiler section. Again, it's very rambly, but yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you on the next episode. See ya.